Welcome to the I Told You So podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl. I started this podcast because I noticed an erosion of societal discourse and how normal conversations are often fueled by polarization. The I Told You So podcast offers an opportunity for healthy discourse and effective discussions. I select topics to discuss with listeners and guests of the I Told You So podcast. Listeners and guests predict what will happen in the future, and I track predictions and announce who predicted accurately when those predictions become true. The podcast offers topics where listeners and guests can participate in discussions with the goal of predicting the future so they can proudly say, I told you so. My guest on this episode is Kolby Van Camp. Kolby is an opera singer, a composer, a sports broadcaster, a media creator, an artist, and an astrophotographer. Kolby holds a music composition and a music education Bachelor of Arts degree from Kansas State University. He also holds a mass communications Master of Science degree from Kansas State University. Kolby currently serves as the sports director for Western Kansas Broadcast Center's radio stations in Garden City, Kansas, where he also is the voice of Garden City Community College and Garden City High School athletics. Kolby also hosts the sports talk show Training Camp with Kolby Van Camp on 99.9 The Rock. Kolby also co-hosts an astronomy podcast. It's called The Space Between, if you want to look that up. He also captures the stars with his camera, and he loves a good whiskey. So, on this episode, Kolby Van Camp and I discuss the future of college sports. So, Kolby, thanks for being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. Let me start by asking you about name, image, and likeness and revenue sharing. So, how do you think the recent NCAA settlement allowing colleges to pay athletes directly will reshape the landscape of college sports?
Well, first of all, Ben, thanks for having me on the show. It's nice to be able to come by and chat with somebody about this. I talk about it on my sports talk show, which you referenced there just a moment ago, a lot. And it's something that is changing the landscape of college athletics right now in a way that is both unique and obnoxious in some ways. And first of all, I think it's worth saying that name, image, likeness is not necessarily what name, image, likeness was originally intended to be, or at least in my opinion, it's not that. Because if you think about one of the key people that name, image, likeness affected back in the mid-2000s, Reggie Bush, right? He had his Heisman Trophy taken away. He had a lot of things going on because he took money impermissibly because of merchandise that had his name, image, and likeness on it, which was considered a breach of amateurism rules by the NCAA. And the NCAA has now relinquished those rules, and name, image, likeness has resulted into a kind of a fake, like, pay-to-play kind of format, I guess you could say. And one of the interesting byproducts of that situation is that players are being offered large sums of money that aren't necessarily tied to their name, image, and likeness, right? If Bronny James was offered, $1.5 million, and I don't know, these numbers are not usually accurate when they're put out on social media. As a Kansas State guy, there was discussion. Coleman Hawkins supposedly was paid $2 million to come to K-State. I have no idea. Nobody knows what those numbers are except Coleman Hawkins, the coaching staff at Kansas State, and Wildcat NIL. So I don't know what those numbers are, and that could just be what somebody reported. But what we do know is that Kansas State and Wildcat NIL has a lot of money, and they have put a lot of time in investing into that war chest so that when somebody of the caliber of Coleman Hawkins comes available in the transfer portal, that they're competitive, that they're able to have that kind of buying power, I guess you could say. And what's interesting to me is that if you took someone like Bronny James, perhaps his name, image, and likeness is worth $1.5 million because his dad's LeBron James, right? He comes from a very high-profile background. If you went and took somebody from, Lake in Kansas, in southwestern Kansas, that played, less than like 2A, 3A high school football and is now coming up into the college ranks and has an opportunity to go D1, and they say, well, my name, image, likeness is worth $700,000. I don't know where they're getting that number. I don't know how we're calculating that number. And it really comes down to the negotiations between these young people and agents. And the agents are in their own territory of regulation, and it's just the Wild West right now. So all of that to say is name, image, and likeness in the way that we view it right now isn't necessarily tied to your actual value of your name, your image, and your likeness. And I try to talk to people about it in the way that it'd be one thing if you were being paid, $5,000 to go do an interview for a fast food chain, right? You're going to be the face of their commercial or whatever. Kind of like, we see Patrick Mahomes doing State Farm commercials, right? I got a kick out of the State Farm commercial last night that he and Andy Reid did for the Fumble Rooski commercial, right? I thought that was hilarious. That's a great usage of name, image, and likeness. And because it's Patrick Mahomes, he's getting paid a lot of money to do that. If you go and pay somebody from college for their name, image, and likeness to go do that, is it translatable? I don't know. But here's the problem. It's usually not being paid for in that way. It's not an industry or a business comes and says, we will pay this person X amount of dollars to come and be the face of our organization, right? We're using their name, their image, and their likeness. Instead, money is deposited from donations to a collective, and the collective then distributes money outside of the university. They're not affiliated with the university or the institution. The collective is its own separate entity that then works in collaboration with the university or the institution. And then they supply money in that way so that you can offer somebody, hey, we'll give you $700,000 to come to our institution to play football. I don't know where they're calculating that money from. But it certainly, in my mind, doesn't necessarily directly tie to name, image, and likeness, which is why Reggie Bush got real fired up when all of this started to come to fruition and players were being paid for their so-called name, image, and likeness. He was like, well, I was, and you took my Heisman away, and now you've made it legal, so can I have my Heisman back? Well, and then they gave it back to him, right? So it's an interesting situation, but the way that NIL has become a kind of a catch-all for the idea that you can now get paid to go to an institution and be a part of their NIL collective, right? And a lot of times it doesn't necessarily have to do specifically with your name, image, and likeness. If you go to 24/7 Sports and you look up their recruiting metrics, you can take a look and see that each high-profile athlete is assigned an NIL value. Again, I have no idea where they're coming up with this number or how they're finding the information to calculate something like that. But suddenly, people have a value, and recruits can use that as a way to say, hey, 24/7 Sports says that I'm worth $50,000 a year, so I want $60,000 a year. And there's this new level of negotiation that goes on that takes the amateurism away from sports, which I think is fascinating, and I think is in some ways a detriment to college athletics. But I also don't mind athletes capitalizing on their name, image, and likeness, right? They're on television. They get to be a part of an institution. My grandfather played 1 year of football for Nebraska on their scout team in 1951, and he always said to the family that football can be a window into an institution, right? And with the current media landscape that we have, football, basketball, all of the sports that are affiliated with an institution are in a lot of ways a window into that institution. So athletes are having their name, image, and likeness used, and I don't necessarily mind that they're being paid for that. What I do kind of scratch my head on is where we're coming up with some of these numbers, some of these astronomical numbers that individuals are being paid for their so-called name, image, and likeness. If we're going to pay them, then let's just pay them, and let's dispense with this idea that it has to do with you're doing commercials or you're, repping a brand other than the university or institution that you're a part of. So the target kind of moves around, and when somebody says NIL, they're essentially meaning whatever money comes from name, image, likeness, and or collective that may or may not broker deals around your actual name, image, and likeness. So it's crazy. It's the Wild West. I try to understand it as best as I can. And even in saying all of that I said to you, I feel about 90% accurate about what I said, but there will always be something that somebody can quibble and say, well, that's not 100% correct, because the target's always moving. It's shifting all over the place. And what's really stupid is that a lot of institutions have gone to the NCAA and said, help us. We need to regulate this. And there's nothing. And you passed this, so now help us regulate it. And the NCAA says, well, we passed it, and now it's your problem. So now you got to figure out how to take care of it. We did the thing. You wanted it. Now you did the thing, and now you have to do it. So it's crazy. It's all over the place, and it's in front of a lot of lawyers. It's in front of a lot of judges. And slowly but surely we'll get more regulation into what NIL actually means. But the House versus NCAA settlement that just got passed is really going to shake things up, because players are no longer amateurs under that. The amateur laws that said you can't get paid to play, which is what NIL in a lot of ways has kind of been masquerading as, is officially players are getting a cut of revenue. And it'll be somewhere in the range between $21 and $28 million. I see different numbers every day where an institution at the highest level in D1 athletics, Power 4 institutions have to come up with, to remain competitive, somewhere between $20 and $28 million annually to be able to revenue share with all of their athletes. In my opinion, we have come to the precipice of completely ruining college sports. And that's not necessarily a controversial opinion. That is not necessarily a controversial prediction. A lot of people are saying, hey man, we're right here at the edge. And if we go any farther, then we're going to just knock everything off. And in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, when my kids want to go to college someday, there might not be college athletics in the way that you and I experience it today here in 2024, or how you and I experienced it 10 years ago in 2014, right? It's just going to be completely different, if not entirely removed from the college institutions that it was originally a part of.
Yeah, really good points. So I do think about the challenges at a Power 5 program. And I think about the smaller programs that are dealing really with the same rules, procedures that they are. However, their revenue is so much smaller, their program so much smaller, their ticket sales so much smaller. How do they compete in this NIL revenue sharing world that's just, frankly, financially unfair from the start? So what challenge do you see? I mean, I would even say, Kansas State is a Power 5, but I would say it's a small Power 5, compared to like Ohio State or Florida, so with just massive population around it and students, student population and enrollment 5 times, bigger. So what are these smaller Power 5s, what are these smaller programs going to do in the future to stay competitive in this NIL revenue sharing environment?
Well, there are a couple of different options, and it's interesting because you and I will reference Kansas State throughout this because we're Kansas State guys, but This is applicable to a lot of different institutions. And if you think of Group of 5, and I guess you could really say Power 4 at this point, because the Pac-12, even though they're revamping it, is just like the fake Mountain West. They just changed the name of the conference. That's really what it is. You just invited a bunch of Mountain West schools and put the Pac-12 logo on them. So, suddenly now are we going to say, oh man, the Pac-12, they're back. Look at all of these schools. Well, you wanted nothing to do with the Mountain West 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. I remember when Boise State came out of the Mountain West and upset Oklahoma in, it's like the Fiesta Bowl or something like that. And it's been 10, 12 years ago. And everybody was like, Boise State, the giant killer. Well, Boise State's now going to be a part of the Pac-12. But are they going to be given the same clout that an Oregon was given because they're part of the Pac-12? I don't think so. I mean, and if that's true, then that's hilariously hypocritical of everybody involved, right? So there's different ways to think about this. But if you're looking at some of the institutions that are around college that don't have the war chest or the revenue resources and funds that come from the Big Ten and the SEC, that come out of the media rights deals and all the negotiations that come with that, then you're right. There's going to be problems. There's going to be problems for a lot of institutions. I know that the Big 12 and the schools in the Big 12 are really kind of sitting around saying, what are we going to do? Because now we have to start coming up with all of this money that we don't necessarily have. So are we going to cut programs? The Olympic sports are really at risk right now. And that's not necessarily like new news. The Olympic sports don't generate the revenue that football generates. Nothing generates the revenue that football generates. You can have a bad football team and probably make more money with just your football team at most institutions than you do any other part of your program, of your athletic program.
Well, there are a lot of programs, a lot of athletic programs that only exist because of the revenue of football.
Exactly. And so you've now run into the issue of how are we going to pay everybody? And frankly, group of 5 schools are at risk. They're at risk. What are you going to do? You either have to start just eviscerating your athletic department and cutting programs altogether. Dabo Swinney got really fired up the other day with Clemson, and I completely understand why. And I talked about it on my sports talk show, that there's discussion of, well, we're going to have to start removing certain people so that we can maintain our Title IX eligibility, right? Because if you cut volleyball, well, then you have to cut something else because there's a bunch of Title IX issues now that come involved with that, right? So you have to find a way to make it equitable. And one of the ways that it is being discussed to make it equitable among the conferences and among commissioners of the conferences is just removing walk-ons altogether for football. And that is, as a Kansas State fan, as somebody who went to Kansas State, who lives in Southwest Kansas, those walk-on opportunities are absolutely crucial for some of these people. I mean, Ben Sinnott, Kansas State tight end, 2nd round draft pick by the Washington Commanders, walk-on. I mean, there are walk-ons that are making huge differences. Dabo Swinney, national championship winning head coach at Clemson, walk-on, Alabama. Right? So like, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about that. Suddenly we're going to start cutting all these walk-ons, and people don't want that, but the numbers don't make any sense if you don't start cutting things. And so something that's interesting to me to try and offset this revenue issue is that Brett Yormark, who is the Big 12 commissioner, has put forth a plan that potentially they'll sell the naming rights of the Big 12 to generate money that then is distributed evenly across all of the Big 12 programs. And so one of those, I don't know where the discussions are at because it kind of made headlines, then went away, and I haven't heard anything about it since. But a month and a half ago, there was discussions about Allstate infusing a couple $2 billion into the Big 12 to make it the Allstate 12. And they were going to put their name on it. They're going to put their logo on it. And all of the teams then benefit within the division of a couple of $1 billion that Allstate then puts into the Big 12 in exchange for the naming rights, the marketing, all of the lucrative parts of that come out of a media rights deal that you can then leverage into using naming power, naming rights like that. So that's one way to think about it. There is an entirely separate way. I'm glad you asked this question because one of the things that is currently being brought up right now in relation to how teams are going to pay for things is the generation of super conferences, right? And so the SEC and the Big Ten are currently meeting in Nashville. I think it's next week, or if not, they're already doing it, to have a conversation about they think that they deserve more money. They think that they deserve more auto bids into the college football playoff. Both conferences won at least 3 automatic bids to go into the college football playoff. Remember, right now, it's only 1 per Power 4 conference, and that 1 belongs to the conference champion. They now want 3 each. So that means that out of a 12-team playoff, 6 of them are guaranteed to come out of the Big Ten and the SEC, which is what they're lobbying. And they're using media numbers. They're using enrollment numbers. They're using all the numbers that you kind of mentioned just a moment ago to fuel this argument. And a new article was put out today by Ross Dellinger, and it's on Yahoo Sports. And it says, the title is, "While the SEC and Big Ten leaders mull major changes, a new Super League concept could radically alter sports." And I've just gone through a little synthesis of this, and here's what the key points are. So this article discusses a new proposal called Project Rudy that could significantly reshape college sports, particularly football. And here are some of these key points. Number 1, Project Rudy is a Super League concept developed by former Disney executives who now work in private equity. Number 2, the proposal aims to create a 70-team structure incorporating the 4 power conferences, expanding the postseason and modifying scheduling, and then introducing tiered revenue distribution. Number 3, it proposes eliminating games from Group of 5 and FCS opponents altogether to increase matchups between power conference teams. And then there are a couple more points here. It says the plan suggests consolidating media rights for all 70 schools into a single agreement, potentially increasing media and sponsorship revenue by approximately $15 billion over a 12-year period. And then Project Rudy aims to inject up to $9 billion in private capital into the system right off the bat. The proposal is designed to align with the recent settlement allowing universities to share revenue directly with athletes. And then some administrators are cautious about the involvement of private equity firms, citing concerns about their desire for high returns and significant control, which, if I'm understanding the article correctly, the private equity in return only wants 5 to 12.5%, somewhere in that range of returns. Then the rest of it gets sent off to colleges for guaranteed money. The proposal comes amid ongoing discussions about potential mergers or realignments in college sports, particularly involving the SEC and Big Ten. The SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey has expressed reluctance to diminish his conference to fit into a speculative 70-team Super League. And then the article suggests that this proposal represents a culmination of a long-standing power struggle between those managing the current system and those advocating for change in college football. And to me, it's an interesting proposal because as somebody who's been a lover of the Big 12, whose team is a part of the Big 12, it ensures that teams like Kansas State, Kansas, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, those kind of institutions don't get left out. And it creates 3 tiers where the upper tier gets the most amount of money, the middle tier gets the middle amount of money, and the lower tier gets the lowest amount of money. But the entire purpose of this is to help offset the costs of the numbers that would be required to be paid for the House versus NCAA. They're talking about putting $9 billion up front, which if you divide that across 70 schools, comes out, and my math could be wrong, but based on this article, it comes out to right around $28 million, which is exactly what the schools need to be able to offset those expenses for the next 10 years, to ensure that they can then pay. They don't have to cut any of their programs. The athletic directors don't have to worry about where that money's coming from. But in exchange, you add a middleman. There's now a private equity firm that gets the rights. They get to be in charge. They are the brokers of the power and the money. They negotiate everything. And so the Big Ten and the SEC are like, we don't want any part of that. It's nice pie in the sky. We don't want any part of that because what if we could just broker that ourselves? We don't have to worry about a middleman. But as somebody that's a part of the Big 12, I would say, well, you want that so that you can give yourself the best deal. And Greg Sankey from the SEC said openly in this article, why would I add a middleman and diminish the ability of what my conference has to do to meet everybody else? He said, they want to be us. That's a direct quote. They want to be us. So why would we lower ourselves to come back to where they want us to be? So it's a big power struggle. Everybody's being held hostage by a small amount of people. And it's ruining college sports. It's ruining college sports. My prediction is that we will end up in super leagues. It will end up as a kind of like a fake NFL, right? Like the NBA has the G League. There will be college teams that maybe are no longer even affiliated with colleges that end up taking over as like farm teams for the NFL. Because I don't know where else this goes. I don't know where it's sustainable, because it's not. And the main problem is that in the process of this, you leave people out. There will be institutions, there will be group of 5 programs that are deserving, that should be there, that should compete, that don't get to anymore. I mean, how nice would it be for Notre Dame to never have to take a loss to a Northern Illinois again, right? Because this is what is proposing. There's going to be 70 teams. We never play a group of 5 again, ever. But we'll give them one auto bid to the college football playoff. So they get one to kind of like appease everybody and to appease Congress, because there's some legal media rights stuff from a bill that was passed in like 1961 that we have to appease. But other than that, we never have to play those guys again. So Notre Dame is saying, cha-ching, I'm never going to take a bad loss again. And none of the other Power 4 teams will ever take a so-called bad loss again to an FCS or a group of 5 team, because they never have to play them, which I think is stupid. Like, if you can't beat a group of 5 team, then that shows some problems in your program that maybe you wouldn't have seen, right? It overinflates value. And I say this knowingly that I commentated the game for the student radio station at K-State in 2022 when they lost to Tulane, a group of 5 team. Like, it was obnoxious, but you got to give Tulane credit because they're a great team. They beat Power 5 programs. So there's so many problems with this that we could spend 3 or 4 hours just talking about this one issue. But my prediction is that, and this is not a particularly radical prediction either, is that we'll end up in super conferences, and that college football is and college athletics, but with football driving the bus, because that's where most of the revenue gets going to begin with, really are at risk of some pretty crazy changes in the coming future that bust up college athletics to begin with. And there's one more note that I'll make, and then I know that you have other topics that you want to get to, and I apologize. I don't want to hold your show hostage on one topic.
No, it's good.
But when I discussed Reggie Bush just a little while ago, Reggie Bush has filed a lawsuit to be compensated for USC by USC. He has filed a lawsuit against USC, the Pac-12, and the NCAA. Those are the 3 people that he's suing for name, image, and likeness compensation that he did not receive when he was in college. If this stands, if this goes through a court of law, college athletics is done. Because then every athlete ever can go back to their institution and say, there is now a legal precedent. Reggie Bush won his lawsuit against his school, the conference, and the NCAA, and they had to pay him the money that he would have been worth in 2006 versus today. They gave him his Heisman back. Apparently that wasn't enough. So now he wants to go back and get all that money. If that happens, then every athlete ever that has come through every program or every college institution that is under the NCAA will have a legal precedent to sue and win the lawsuit against their institution, their conference, and the NCAA. It will bankrupt everybody. I don't know if that's his, purpose, but I don't know if he's thought it through. I'd love to talk to him and say, are you aware that if you win this, you're going to kill college sports? Is that what you really want to do? I thought that you loved USC. If you loved USC and you fought so hard to get your Heisman back and you got it back, then what are we doing? Why are you trying to dismantle college sports? Because if there's a legal precedent for this now, forget about it. Anybody will be able to go back and sue him. And then where does it end? How many people have been disenfranchised or not allowed to do something because of archaic rules and legislature that they are now able to do? Will women be able to go back and sue the United States for all the elections that they weren't allowed to vote in? Where does it end? And will that overturn elections? Will Franklin, not FDR, but will Theodore Roosevelt no longer be the president in American history books because we overturned an election from 120 years ago because of a lawsuit in 2024? Like, I don't know, but that's like the direction in which college sports is going. And this is nobody's talking about it, but it is a pivotal moment for me that if Reggie Bush wins this lawsuit against USC, the Pac-12, and the NCAA to be compensated for the money he felt like he deserved when he was in college 20 years ago, it's over. That will kill sports, that college athletics, because then everybody gets to take a share of that pie and it will bankrupt everybody. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, maybe that answers this question. So I was thinking about how might the introduction of direct compensation to athletes impact the amateur status of college sports. So maybe it's answered in that, but maybe you have another answer for that too.
It depends on that legal precedent. First of all, it depends on whether Reggie Bush wins that lawsuit or not. But it also is dependent upon, and by the way, if you want to know about the Reggie Bush lawsuit, you should be able to just Google it. I talked about it on my sports talk show a couple weeks ago, because it was all over Twitter, of all places. I'm like, this will kill college sports. The current revenue sharing model, is we can't say amateurs anymore. There was an interesting conversation that Deion Sanders had with a reporter in a press conference about a week and a half ago, where the reporter called out something that one of his athletes did. And he was like, 20 years ago, you would have never asked us that. You would have never said that to my player. And what happened to treating them like amateurs? I talked about on my show. I was like, wait a minute, man. Like, you want to pay them like professionals, but now they're amateurs when they talk to the media? No, it's one or the other. Either they're being paid and now have the media responsibilities like professionals, or they're not being paid and they have the media responsibilities like amateurs, right? So there's this weird, coaches want to have both in certain areas. And I don't even know what the question was that was asked of his player. It could have been completely inappropriate. And if that's the case, then great. And good for Deion for saying, why would you say that to my player? Like, what kind of stupid question was that? That's great. I completely understand. And if one of the most iconic speeches of all time in a press conference is Mike Gundy saying, I'm a man, I'm 40, come and get me. These are 18 to 22-year-olds. I'm 40. You can come and get me. Don't come and get them. And I respect that. I think that's great. And you should hold on to your journalistic integrity in that way, right? Don't just go and attack college athletes because you think that you can. I'm not a proponent of that at all, but it was that specifically that he said, well, 20 years ago they were amateurs. So are they still amateurs? Well, no, according to the very legal definition of what an amateur is, you're not paying them to be an amateur anymore. They're a professional. So you can't use that argument. Now, can you say, I think that was a stupid question, and based off of general journalistic principles, you shouldn't have asked that question? Great. But you can't now say, well, we're paying them like professionals. I'm sending Deion Sanders, this piece put out by Sports Illustrated. Colorado sent one of their assistant coaches to lobby, I think it was Saudi Arabia, for money to go into their NIL collective. They wanted to get Saudi dollars to go into their NIL collective. That was an opportunity that they looked into. So I'm like, Deion, you can't send somebody from Saudi to go to Saudi Arabia to lobby NIL money and then say, hey, they're still an amateur, right? So there's just a disconnect there, in my opinion. And if I'm wrong on that, I'd love to know. I'd love to have a conversation about that, and get the perspective. But you can't have it both ways. And so that's like a weird byproduct that we've run into is, what do we call athletes now? They're being paid like professionals, but are they still amateurs? And if they are still amateurs, do they get the protection that amateurs had previously gotten by the NCAA? I don't know. So that's a gray area.
Are they even still student athletes?
Right. Yeah, that's a completely separate. That's like way out. It continues on in that direction, right?
Right.
And some of the old school philosophy is, student athletes should not be paid because they're getting a free education, and that is very valuable. I understand a free education is valuable. I got my master's degree essentially for free because I did an assistantship at K-State. I was given an assistantship. I worked in the program and I taught classes, in exchange for the education that I did. So like, I understand. But again, I don't have a problem where if you're capitalizing as an institution off of somebody's name, image, and likeness, that they're compensated for that name, image, and likeness, but that's not what they're being compensated for. Or at least not wholly what they're being compensated for. And the numbers are just going way out of control for what that compensation looks like. I mean, can I get paid like $700,000 to go do a commercial? If I went into anywhere in Garden City and said, hey, I'm your local sports talk guy. I'm the voice of Garden City Community College, and I'd like to do a commercial for you for the local TV station, and that'll be $700,000. They'd be like, no, like, goodbye. We won't be doing that. So, and I'm the so-called professional, right? So, like, that's one way of thinking about it. It's kind of comparing apples and oranges, but that's one way of thinking about it.
Right. Well, let's talk about the transfer portal. I know a lot of people have been thinking about this. Seems to be a pretty heavy topic in the world of college sports athletics. So let me ask you this: what are your predictions on how the transfer portal will evolve in the next few years, and how will it affect team dynamics and player development?
It's an interesting conversation, and there will be regulations that are put in place for the transfer portal. To me, I try to live my life off of the philosophical principle of Occam's razor, right? All things being equal, the simplest answer is usually the correct one. And I have synthesized that into a way of I think about things on a pendulum, and that there's all the way over to one side, all the way over to the other side, and in the middle is generally where you want to be on most things. And at least I have found that my happy place is usually in the middle, right?
The Goldilocks zone.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I say on this podcast talking about highly controversial sports topics, right? So that take that as you will.
Yeah.
But to me, the pendulum was all the way over here for a really long time, where if people transferred, there were all sorts of limitations. You could only transfer if your coach left, and there was a finite amount of transfers you could do. And if you made a transfer, you had to sit out a year. All this stuff that went with it, that de-incentivized or disincentivized people to transfer, which for that time might have worked, is now in comparison archaic to what we're doing today.
Yes,
I think we went to the extreme on the other side of the pendulum with this, where it is anybody can transfer as many times as they want to as many institutions. They don't have to give a reason why. As long as they are within the window, they can jump in, jump out, jump in, jump out. They can do whatever they want. And I mean, even in the professional landscape, like Davante Adams right now, there's a lot of problems with Davante Adams and the Raiders, right? Davante Adams can't become a free agent and then not, and then become a free agent and then not. He can't go back and forth. So if the professionals aren't allowed to do that, then why should the student athlete be allowed to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth? So I think that is my prediction is that will get shored up. There will be a finite amount of times that you can transfer. And right now it's unlimited. You can jump in the transfer portal, and as long as you jump in during the window of time when it's open, there it is. And so I think that my prediction is that that will get closed up, and that it won't be a finite amount of times, or like there will be some sort of penalty involved. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know exactly where that's going to go, but the ability for athletes to just go in and out and in and out and in and out is, I think, in some ways kind of problematic. And there should be an appeals process. If you feel like you went to an institution, they did you wrong, and you want to get back into the transfer portal, and then somebody else did you wrong. Like there are ways that I think you should be able to appeal that under the right circumstances. But again, part of the problem is that the NCAA was kind of like, well, we gave you what you wanted. Now you have to figure it out, and we wash our hands. That's kind of the precedent that's been set by the NCAA. And so the gears of institutional control move very slowly. Let's put it that way. The levers of power are very slowly moved, right? And so I don't foresee this changing anytime soon. and it will go in small incremental changes. But I think ultimately, when it's all said and done, the transfer portal will have a finite amount of times you can transfer with an appeals process so that you can transfer multiple times, and that the current transfer portal windows might get shaken up a little bit. I don't know. I don't have any specifics on that. But I think that those portal windows, because they're changed every year, there's a little bit of nuance that's adjusted with them every year. So I think that will continue until a happy medium is struck. Let me be clear. I don't have a problem with the transfer portal, because the people that are able to use the transfer portal to their benefit do it really well. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But there are so many other not great things that come with that. Tampering, which is one thing. That is a word that you shouldn't say, right? Because people don't want to know. And you're not supposed to talk about it. It's kind of taboo in that way. Because there's no regulation now you're not supposed to do it, but there's no regulation on how they're going to stop. So no, if you don't say anything, then it is what it is. So, there's all sorts of, issues with tampering that coaches, are talking about regularly. That is a direct byproduct of name, image, likeness, and the transfer portal. And so that's just, I don't know. Until you start shoring some of those things up, it's going to continue to be the Wild West, and it'll be a free-for-all. Jerome Tang, I thought, was really eloquent on a K-State podcast earlier this summer, about a month ago, where he said, right now we have an opportunity, if we're K-State, to go and acquire the people that we need to acquire using the current regulations, the acceptances and the limitations that are in place right now, to go and try and build a national championship team. Because once you have a national championship team and you get one of those banners in your rafters, everything changes. And then once you have that credibility, and you get to move in that direction. And when all of those legislative things get shored up and things change, then you will be the one that has the banner, right? If there's ever a time to go and do it, now is the time. And he didn't say go do something illegal, right? He didn't say we're going to go tamper with every possible player that we can. I think Kansas State runs a very legitimate. I think they run a very legally sound, tight organization that doesn't mess around with any funny business. And I thought that was an interesting perspective, that if there's ever a time to go do it, using the current landscape of where we are in college athletics, now's the time. So you have to capitalize on that, so that when things change, as they inevitably do, you have the banner in the rafters, right? And that applies to anybody. So if you have the resources to go and do what you need to do to go get the team that you need out of the transfer portal, go for it. And more power to you. And I salute the heck out of you if you can do that. But know that there is a day when that's going to change, and it's going to hamstring a lot of organizations that would have previously had a lot of power right now, that in the future will not, because of limitations that are being slowly implemented throughout the NCAA.
Yeah, appreciate that. So another part to this question that I'd like to maybe your opinion on is about the dynamics of the team, player development, but it's not just about transfer portal, but it's also about how NIL and revenue sharing might impact a culture of a team. And I know Gene Taylor, the athletic director for Kansas State University, has talked about this and how it's a really delicate situation, especially with basketball, because the team's so small. So a lot of those players they're competitors, right? So that's their life, is to compete. So they're always competing, even with themselves. So when they see someone is getting more money and they're not performing in their minds, to deserve that money, and that player who sees that might have some jealousy because he is performing better but not making that much money, or there's a transfer player that comes in and takes another player's spot who was doing very well. At least he thinks he was. And now this new transfer comes in and takes his spot. So it seems to me that the NIL, the revenue sharing, the transfer portal can really have some pretty negative effects on the culture, the dynamics, and the player development of a team. What do you think about that?
we've entered into some of the hypotheticals that I don't necessarily feel qualified to answer.
Yeah.
But what I'll say is this: right now the transfer portal, NIL, all of that are tools, and like every tool, there are ways that a tool can be wielded for positive outcomes and for negative outcomes, right? A screwdriver can be used to fix a number of things. Can also be used to shank somebody, right? So like it's very much dependent on how you use the tool. I can't speak for Kansas State. I don't know the inner workings of what their locker room is like. I don't know what numbers they guarantee. I don't understand. I do understand. I don't know those numbers. I'm not privy to those numbers. And if I was, I know I would not be able to share them. So I don't know. And that's like at face value. Yes, there are a number of ways where that tool could be used in a fairly benign manner that could probably disrupt a lot of, locker room culture kind of things. That is very much dependent on the coaches and the administration of each institution that uses the same tools that everybody else is using. And I think, Deion Sanders is a great example because he wields that tool very well. He has a lot of really high profile, very skilled players that were dissatisfied at where they were that are now with his program because he used the tools really well that are available to him. I think Kansas State, because we're both K-State guys, I think Jerome Tang has done a really great job at looking at the tools that are available to him and using them for Kansas State's benefit. And what's one of the key things that Coach Tang is always talking about is that, yeah, we want somebody that's good. Like, clearly you want a good basketball player. Clearly they need to have the metrics. They need to be tall. They need to have some of those intangibles. What is the first thing that he always says? We want a program guy that's bought into our coaching philosophy and our locker room culture. And that is our number one thing. And so, I mean, if you're a coach and you're not looking for that right out of the bat, my personal opinion is that you're playing with fire because now you've removed one of the more important intangibles out of the equation. But again, it's a tool that can be wielded for net positive or net negative. And, I'll let you and your listeners' imagination kind of do the rest. But then we're creeping into areas where I probably need to say "mum's the word" because of my current roles with academic institutions.
Yeah,
so
I get it. So
that's what I would say about that.
So speaking of transfer portal as being a tool, so how might the transfer portal as a tool influence the balance of power between larger and smaller programs?
It's everything. It's the great equalizer. Florida Atlantic, FAU goes to the Elite Eight. They go to the Final Four because they were able to generate some high-profile transfers that came over to their institution. You will now see more lower-tiered seeds. It is my opinion, and you can count this as a prediction. The longer that the transfer portal exists, let's use basketball as an example. Because football, the transfer portal is a little bit different, right? There's a finite amount of guys. There's only a couple of them. You only need a couple of them usually every year, unless you're completely rebuilding a team. And then even then that comes with its own price tag and team morale and cohesion and all this other stuff. Basketball, you can really get away with bringing in a high volume of transfer players right out of the box. And to me, there will be more lower tiered teams, that are mid majors and low majors that are going to start really upsetting teams when you get to the NCAA tournament, right? A couple years ago, 2019, K-State goes on that really big run to the Elite Eight. And what was the Cinderella story of the round of 64? UMBC knocks off Virginia. The number one overall seed is the first time it had ever happened. Who do they play next? K-State. Cats win. They go to the Elite Eight, right? You're going to see a lot more of that. Kentucky got knocked off by like a 14 seed this year. I can think of a handful of high-seeded teams that got knocked off, and 16 to 12 seeded teams in the NCAA tournament advanced to the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight. That is, in my opinion, a direct relationship with the transfer portal because they're able to go and recruit those guys that were high major guys that were playing D1 group of 5 Power 4 basketball and say, we can give you an opportunity here. There you go. And now they've got these unbelievable players that give them a boost. And it's fun because I'm a part of the NJCAA, and it used to be kind of that way for the NJCAA, right? Bill Snyder in the late 90s utilized so many Jayhawk Conference guys to play for Kansas State football because they were out of the package, right out of the box. They're ready to play football. You don't have to work in like hyper developing some of these guys like you would a freshman in high school. They're already coming in as a junior with 2 years of playing experience in one of the toughest NJCAA conferences in America. That was huge. It was revolutionary. Nobody was doing it. Bill Snyder started it, and then everybody else started doing it. The transfer portal is the same way. And instead of the NJCAA, you're now going to start seeing mid and low major teams really break through and get into really crazy spots in the NCAA tournament because the parity of play is going to shrink due to the transfer portal and some of the really high caliber guys that come out of the transfer portal and go to mid-major and low-major teams from Group of 5 or Power 4 conference teams that they had previously been a part of.
All right, let's talk about sports gambling. So how do you think the increasing legalization of sports betting will impact college sports, particularly in the terms of integrity and player conduct?
And this is the $1 million question, in some ways, literally, but in other ways, because of the speculation that is involved that I can't necessarily get into in some ways. What I can say is this. Sports gambling has been a problem for a long time for a lot of different individuals. I mean, back into the 60s and 70s, you have examples of professional athletes that were betting on games, right? There was the big uproar on Twitter a week ago because his name escapes me, but the baseball,
Pete Rose.
MLB all-time hitter,
Pete Rose.
Yeah, thank you. Pete Rose passed
Yep.
away and did not get into the Hall of Fame during his lifetime because he received a lifetime ban from baseball because he got caught betting on games. So, it's a tough situation. Clearly, you can't let athletes bet on games because the moment that you give somebody the right to legally throw a game, right, then it's going to get into. If you thought that everything we just talked about was the Wild West, forget about it. If we allow college athletes, professional athletes, athletes across the high school athletes, it doesn't matter. Anybody who's an athlete that is invested in the outcome of a game and has a direct influence on the outcome of a game. If they get involved in sports betting, that's it. So that'll never be legalized. That will never go anywhere. And they take that really, really seriously, very seriously. Guys with promising careers have messed up their careers because of sports gambling. And it's an underrated discussion in how sports gambling and gambling in general can be an addiction. We often hear about, if you have an alcohol problem, go to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you have a narcotics problem, you can go to here. Only recently have I started hearing ads during, sports podcasts that I enjoy listening to that involve a certain level of, sports betting discussion that DraftKings has started putting out PSAs where it's if you have a betting problem, here's the phone number you should call. It's really interesting. It's kind of as a communications person, as somebody got their master's in mass communications, it's a fascinating communications turn of events and kind of a study that could be done around how suddenly, because of the legalization of sports betting in a lot of different places, people are like, oh, well, it used to be you had to go to Las Vegas to do it, right? Or go to a casino. You can do it from your phone now. And there are just a lot of problems that come up with sports betting. I don't personally buy in sports betting as long as you're not affiliated with it. But there are fascinating nuances. For instance, my brother is an athlete at an institution, and I asked him, would you like to be a part of my fantasy football league? And he said, if whoever wins, do they get money? Do I have to put money into it? And I said, no. Why? And he said, the quality control person at my institution gave a big speech to everybody at the beginning of football season that if you engage in a fantasy league that involves money, that's considered sports gambling, and you can lose your scholarship and your NCAA eligibility for that. Wow. I didn't know that, right? When I took my job as the voice of Garden City Community College, I had to look into, I'm like, I'm not employed by Garden City Community College, but I represent, right, the institution. I have to carry myself in a conduct that is representative of the institution of which I'm a part of, that I'm affiliated with. Am I allowed to sports gamble? I don't sports gamble, but I've thought about it. There have been a couple of times where I've made like great predictions, like locks in my head, and been like, I should have put $10 on that. I would have made $100. Are you kidding me? I tell you what, last Super Bowl, a friend of mine reaches out to me and he says, I've never gambled before on a football game. I'm going to put $100 on the Chiefs to win, and you're going to help me. And I was like, man, I don't gamble. You should know. And he goes, how many points do you think they're going to win by? What do you think? And I said, if you lose your money, it's not my fault. All right. But if you want to know my opinion, Chiefs win by 3, because look at what they've done this season. And what do you know? Patrick Mahomes throws the touchdown in overtime. And because it's overtime, they don't kick a PAT. Chiefs win by 3. And he texts me and he says, I just won $600. So thank you for that. I'm like, dang, maybe I should have put down $100. Like, that was a great prediction. I should have done that myself. It's crazy. I've thought about sports gambling, but I've chosen not to for a number of reasons. But one of them is because I'm not 100% sure what the regulations are if I can do that, because I'm affiliated with an NCAA or an NJCAA. I'm affiliated with an academic institution that has an athletics department. I have inside information, right? I get to go to practice. I get to go to practice for the Brockbusters. I get to go to practice for the high school. Does that influence the outcome of the game? Probably not. I don't personally influence the outcome of the game, but I just don't know. So it's a massive gray area. There are so many things that I'm not entirely sure about. And so for this one, because my career could be at stake, right? I just don't do it. I don't engage with it. And until I would love to put a couple of bets down every once in a while. But until I get clear cut, you're good. I'm not going to do it, personally until I know. So, that is a floodgate that will never, ever be opened, because the risk and temptation, because we're human, and the ability to make astronomical sums of money, by helping decide the outcome of games is, very great. If it's like, hey, you stand to win $10 million because you purposefully don't catch the game-winning touchdown. Do you catch the game-winning touchdown? So it puts a huge conflict of interest and integrity on the line. And the NJCAA, the NAIA, the NCAA, it'll never fly. So that is one prediction that I feel 100% locked on. You can take it to the bank. You could bet on anything. You could bet on this prediction that sports gambling will never be a thing for high school, college, or professional athletes, because there's too many conflicts of interest that are involved. So that'll never be a thing.
Without ramifications, of course.
Right. 100%.
Yeah. So what measures do you think colleges and NCAA should take to protect athletes from the potential negative impacts of sports gambling?
I think there are, and I don't personally know what the quality control of each institution does. I'm sure that there are people that talk to their athletes. I don't know, but I feel confident that a number of athletes are given a number of advisors throughout their time while they're at an academic institution, specifically for college. So I feel confident that there are people that are saying, hey, don't gamble, right? But I think this should be expanded to a larger thing. How many professional athletes have we seen be first round draft picks? They get, here's your $15 million rookie contract. What's the first thing they do? They buy a Lamborghini. They go out and they blow all of their money. And then before you know it, when they've retired, they're in debt or they don't have any money. And it's like, you just played 10 years in the NFL. You should be worth, $250 million. Why do you have no money? And it's been a huge thing that I've seen in the recent year to 5 years where player organizations, the NFLPA, a lot of institutions are trying to come out and provide like financial literacy courses to athletes. And that's huge, man. Paying your taxes does not come with an instruction manual, right? Understanding how to take out a loan to buy a house doesn't come with an instruction manual. There are so many like financial literacy things that it is my personal opinion that we don't, as a society, teach people enough of. That could start in middle school. It could start in high school, right? We're messing around with trigonometry. What if we taught, a trigonometry for high school students that 2% of those students are going to end up using trigonometry in their professional career, right? And I just pulled that number out of thin air. I don't have any like education statistics that say exactly 2.5% of people who graduated high school use trigonometry in their profession. I don't have that number. It's just off the dome. But how much more sense would it make to let's have a class for high school juniors that starts in your junior year, and you take it throughout your junior year, and you take it through your senior year, or it's kind of like, you have biology, and you have like AP biology, which counts for a college credit. Why don't we have a financial literacy with another, like an AP financial literacy course, where the first one teaches you how to balance a checkbook. It teaches you how to understand interest rates. It teaches you how to calculate that kind of stuff so that when you take out a credit card someday, you don't end up with an insane amount of debt, right? Why don't we teach people that in high school? And then when they get to their senior year, you say, hey, now we're going to teach you how to take out a loan. We're going to teach you what it looks like to buy a car. We're going to teach you what it looks like to pay your taxes. We're going to do that kind of stuff. And then especially athletes in college should be getting this kind of training, because I'm 25. My wife and I discuss, like, just for the fun of it, like, what would you do today if you were given $10 million? Like, what would be your first move? What are you doing? And we always say to ourselves, we would take care of these kind of things, these kind of obligations, make the renovations we want to the house that we just bought, et cetera, and then we would save a percentage of it and live off of the interest, off of a high percent interest rate of a savings account. And then we would donate the rest of it because we want to be charitable. And let's do that. That's all good and well. That's great for Mr. and Mrs. Van Camp until we actually get $10 million. When the rubber hits the road, are you really going to do that? I don't know. I can't say that I would know that. I'd like to think that I would. I've never been given $10 million. And so we're anticipating 18 to 22-year-olds who are given $15 million contracts as rookies to be able to be financially literate enough to know what to do with that money? No, that's crazy. And the assumption that that's what is happening is wild to me. Mm-hmm. And the more that institutions and like the NFL, the NBA, NCAA start to like regulate that and require student athletes to have a basic understanding of, you will likely make large sums of money, especially now with name, image, and likeness, where student athletes who are 18, 19 years old are getting unbelievable amounts of money to go play for institutions. But the institution doesn't have a responsibility in training them how to be good stewards of that money. That's crazy. So in the same vein, they should be doing that with understanding sports betting and the risks that are involved with sports betting. And that sports betting is an addictive thing that some people lose their livelihoods and their lives to. It should be treated like the same thing as, having a beer with dinner is fun. Maybe if you get a little bit tipsy, all right, fine. Don't do anything dangerous. Don't drive a car or anything like that. Use common sense, but don't get addicted to alcohol. That'll ruin your life. Don't get addicted to drugs. That'll ruin your life. So don't get addicted to sports gambling. And very few people and organizations are out there telling, let alone the general public, and not current and retired professional athletes that have insane amounts of money, be careful of sports betting because you can lose so much of it so fast. It's not funny how quickly you can lose that money. So that's like my personal soapbox that involves a lot more than just sports betting. But it comes down to sports betting is like a branch on the tree of financial literacy to me. And the fact that there isn't more of an emphasis on teaching these young people in college athletics who are rookies in the NFL, who are veterans in the NFL, the NBA, professional sports, how to use their money in a financially literate way is crazy to me. Case in point, my dad is a physician, and now it's a lot higher stakes, I understand, but he has to do CMEs, continuing medical education. He practices medicine every day in high-risk environments and is required once every couple of years to take X amount of hours of continuing medical education because the expectation is that you don't lose your edge as a physician, because if that happens, then there's a huge liability issue involved if you make a mistake, right? And so being on top of your continuing medical education is a way for you, in the event that you get sued, you can say, I've been up to date on my continuing medical education. This was part of the known risks. It just happened. Not every procedure goes 100% correct 100% of the time, right? So why aren't we requiring veterans in the NFL to be able to take a continuing financial literacy course as their net worth continues to grow and grow and grow? Why aren't we doing that? And that to me is just mind-boggling that we're just like, here's an insane amount of money. Good luck. Hope you figure it out, you know? And so that's my soapbox. That's a personal soapbox kind of thing. And this is not a prediction because I don't necessarily see it changing anytime soon, but I would love to see high schools around the country really buy into financial literacy for everybody, because it's a huge issue for everybody, let alone college athletes who are going to receive astronomically larger amounts of money compared to their peer who is 18 years old going through their undergraduate degree versus the 18-year-old college basketball phenom who's getting a $500,000 NIL deal, right? Then it's there's so many risks involved that I wish that institutions were taking more charge of providing resources for. So could there be? Yes, I think there are, but I wish it was more and more readily available. So there's my soapbox.
Well, I'm right there with you on that soapbox. I was assistant director for the Office of Student Financial Assistance for about a decade at Kansas State University. So I really stressed to parents and students because they weren't getting it in their high schools to learn how to be good financial stewards. And hopefully, some of the things I told them, some of the tips I gave to them worked. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think there needs to be more financial literacy and better financial stewardship for the upcoming generation and those who are in college, especially with those who are making a lot in college that we didn't anticipate making this much money even 7 years ago. So appreciate your comments, Kolby. Thanks again for being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. I appreciate the predictions. And we'll see if you're right about that. So I think people will be paying attention to that. So if you want to learn more about Kolby, fascinating person. So you can look him up on VanCampArt, and that's VanCampArt.com. That's his website. And you can follow him on several social media channels. So because this podcast is about predicting the future, my questions to those listening are, do you agree with Kolby VanCamp's assessment on college sports in the areas we talked about, and NIL, revenue sharing, transfer portal, sports gambling? Do you agree with what he's saying, where he thinks we're going with college sports, and why or why not? Also, what do you think about the future of college sports? Will more or less regulation help college sports in the future? When I'm talking about regulation, I'm talking about regulation that spans across many areas and topics, including sports gambling in that. So really appreciate Kolby and the time he gave to us and the thoughts he has on this. So If you are a listener and you want to let me know about some of your own thoughts, please text or call me at 785-473-3721, or you can send an email message to me at ITYS@BenKohlITYS.com, or post on any of my social media channels. So I do ask you to go to the I Told You So podcast website. You can go there to connect, and it's the website address is BenKohlITYS.com. That's BenKohlITYS.com. You can go there to get I Told You So items as well at the merchandise link. So you can go there to listen on Spotify. You can watch on YouTube, but also you can go to the merchandise link and get shirts and hoodies and hats and coffee mugs and lots of other items. So my hope is that the I Told You So podcast is a space for healthy discourse and effective discussions with the goal of predicting the future, so you can proudly say, I told you so. So if your business or organization is interested in advertising on the I Told You So podcast, please let me know that too. So thanks for tuning in to the I Told You So podcast. And I thank again my guest, Kolby Van Camp. So I do want to remind you that followers of the podcast are very important. So please follow, like, subscribe, leave a comment, give a high rating, and share with your friends. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl, and I hope to hear from you soon.